Let's continue our journey into the exhibition of the year, Caravaggio 2025. In this episode, we follow Caravaggio from fame to scandal, an event that transformed his life and art forever. We'll explore the hidden stories behind his painting, where cardinals, courtesans and street boys come to life in 17th century Rome. Enjoy the visit. In the second room of the exhibition, we meet the true master of this palace, Maffeo Barberini. This distinguished prelate, who would go on to become Pope Urban VIII in 1623, commissioned the grand palace that now welcomes us as the residence of his powerful family. When Caravaggio first met Maffeo, thanks to the influential Cardinal del Monte, the two were almost the same age. At that time, the painter was already enjoying his first major triumphs, while Maffeo was advancing steadily through the ranks of the Roman Curia, fresh from his prestigious appointment as apostolic protonotary. He was an educated, ambitious man in his 30s, clever, determined, and full of resources. Even then, you could sense in his gaze the drive for a meteoric rise. In the years to come, he would serve as ambassador to France, be elevated to cardinal, and finally become pope, leaving his mark on Rome through grand architectural and artistic projects. In this portrait, Caravaggio captures his character with extraordinary clarity. Maffeo doesn't pose stiffly in a traditional manner. Instead, he appears caught off guard in a moment of daily life. His eyes are turned beyond the edge of the canvas, fixed with determination on something unseen. With his right hand, he seems to be giving an order. With the left, he grasps a letter or document firmly, as if to underline his authority. It's a speaking portrait, dynamic and strikingly modern, rediscovered in 1963 by the art critic Roberto Longhi in a private collection. This exhibition marks only the second time it has been shown to the public since that discovery. Next to it, you'll see a second portrait of Maffeo Barberini, of uncertain attribution and very different in style. An additional tribute to a central figure in Caravaggio's career. Indeed, Maffeo and the Barberini family were among the painter's key patrons and collectors. Many of the works we see today were once kept here in this very palace, before the Barberini collection was dispersed in the 1930s to museums around the world. Among the masterpieces returning home for this occasion is the splendid St. Catherine of Alexandria, one of the most mesmerizing paintings in the entire exhibition. It was Antonio Barberini, Maffeo's brother, who acquired this painting, which originally belonged to the collection of Cardinal del Monte. Del Monte was deeply devoted to St. Catherine of Alexandria. He owned at least 4 other images of the saint, and in his will placed himself under her protection. For this reason, he commissioned Caravaggio to create this work for his Roman palace. There's no doubt that St. Catherine was a figure of powerful fascination. According to tradition, she was a young Egyptian noblewoman and a fervent Christian who publicly debated the most celebrated pagan scholars of her time. She defeated them all through her knowledge and unshakable faith. Humiliated by her defiance, the Roman emperor condemned her to torture on a spiked wheel. But legend tells us that a bolt of lightning struck the wheel, shattering it and sparing her life. She was eventually executed by the sword, becoming one of the earliest and most venerated martyrs in Christian tradition. And yet, at first glance, Caravaggio's painting shows no sign of this tragic fate. The saint is portrayed in a moment of silent contemplation. She kneels on a red cushion, dressed in a sumptuous gown, gazing out at us intensely. Caravaggio lets the surrounding objects narrate a story. The broken wheel, the bloodied sword, and the palm branch on the floor, symbols of her martyrdom. A faint halo glows above her head, the only supernatural detail the artist permits himself in an image where everything else is painted from life, from the rich fabrics to the cushion beneath her knees. The sword is almost certainly the same weapon Caravaggio carried with him through the streets of Rome at night, the very sword for which he was repeatedly arrested and detained in the Tordinona prison, charged for carrying illegal weapons. Ironically, the court records of those arrests tell us more about his personal life than any official biography. St. Catherine's fingers barely touch the sword in a gesture of almost distracted delicacy, as if the memory of her suffering no longer belongs to her. It's clear that Caravaggio is not painting a distant holy icon, but the portrait of a real, flesh and blood woman whose presence feels immediate and alive. But who was she? Art historians have identified her face as that of Filli de Melandroni, a well-known figure in 17th century Rome. She was one of the so-called honest courtesans, not mere prostitutes, but cultured companions who moved confidently through the city's most exclusive palaces. Women who could hold their own in conversation with cardinals, nobles and artists. She arrived in Rome as a teenager from Tuscany, and thanks to her extraordinary beauty, intelligence and ambition, quickly rose to a leading role in the city's high society. Muse, model and perhaps Caravaggio's lover, Filli appears in several of his paintings from this period, works that are now, at last, reunited in this exhibition. Before we move on to the next canvas, take a moment, look closely at her dress. A magnificent black gown decorated with gold embroidery. Now, turn around. In the next painting, you'll see the same gown, the same model, but the story they tell is completely different. In Caravaggio's time, Mary Magdalene was the ultimate symbol of the redeemed sinner, a woman whose life is radically transformed by an encounter with the divine. Caravaggio tells the story of redemption in an intimate, familiar setting. Mary Magdalene sits beside her sister Martha, who leans towards her, passionately urging her to change her life, to leave sin behind, and to rediscover faith. Magdalene is captured at the very instant of transformation. She holds a white flower, a symbol of purity, and turns her gaze away from the mirror, the bone comb, and the face powder scattered on the table, objects that evoke vanity and seduction. For the first time, she allows herself to be moved by her sister's words. Caravaggio doesn't need grand gestures or elaborate backdrops. Ordinary objects, expressive glances, and believable gestures are enough to tell the story. And to make the bond between the two women feel genuine, he chose Anna Bianchini, Filli's close friend, as the model for Martha. In real life, the two were almost like sisters themselves. They had shared a home and the first hopes and struggles when they arrived in Rome. This painting, here on loan from the United States, is a perfect example of the transformation underway in Caravaggio's approach to art. As we saw in St. Catherine, he continues to interpret biblical story through a contemporary lens, bringing out their universal themes and entrusting them to models capable of conveying in a raw, human truth. But here, something new is happening. Caravaggio is beginning to strip away everything non-essential. He reduces, simplifies, focuses to achieve maximum emotional impact. The background is dissolved into a deep theatrical darkness. As one of his biographers wrote, he began to embolden the shadows. The light becomes more artificial, almost like stage lighting. It sculpts the faces, pulls the body out of the dark, and heightens the contrasts. These are exactly the elements that will come together in his next masterpiece. According to the Old Testament, Judith, a young Jewish widow, seduces the enemy army's general, Holofernes, to save her people. After a banquet, taking advantage of his drunkenness, she slips into his tent and decapitates him in his sleep with his own sword. A violent act, but necessary to free her city, Betulia, from siege. Caravaggio takes us straight into the heart of that night, into the Babylonian general's tent, and he holds us there in the most brutal, decisive moment of the story. Judith drives a dagger into Holofernes' neck. His face contours in agony, his eyes fixed, his mouth gaping, his body writhing in a last spasm. Caravaggio captures the precise instant suspended between life and death. It's said that he was inspired by a tragic figure of his own time, Beatrice Cenci, a young Roman woman executed for killing her abusive father. Caravaggio had witnessed her public execution, an event that shocked all of Rome and perhaps left its mark on the most harrowing details of this painting. Philide, his favorite model, plays the role of Judith, directed with the skill of a stage master. Her expression reveals a clash of emotions: anger, resolve, disgust. Her arms are tense, almost recoiling from the dying body. To heighten the contrast, Caravaggio places the old servant at her side. She clutches a cloth in her hands, ready to catch the severed head, her wrinkled face fixed in a pitiless, almost grotesque stare. Ottavio Costa, who commissioned the painting, was both appalled and fascinated. He kept it hidden behind a curtain, showing it only to a select circle of guests. In his will, he even urged his heirs to preserve it carefully. It wasn't until 1971 that the Italian state finally succeeded in acquiring it, the last great Caravaggio work to enter public collections, a key milestone in the painter's restless maturity. By then, Caravaggio had reached the full power of his style, sharper and sharper contrasts of light and darkness, faces and gestures lead at the peak of the emotion. He no longer relied on subtle symbols alone. He wanted to tell stories with a raw, almost physical force, so we feel them in our flesh. And even the most skeptical collectors began to compete for his work. Commissions poured in, and with success came nourishment for the artist, but poison for the man. The brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadow he cast. A document dated January 2, 1603 tells us that Ciriaco Mattei, a Roman nobleman, paid 125 scudi, a considerable sum, for the delivery of a canvas depicting the taking of Christ. Then, silence. For centuries the painting vanished without a trace, until an incredible rediscovery. In 1990, the Jesuits in Dublin received the painting as a donation, believed to be nothing more than a copy. But during restoration, the surprise. Beneath layers of dirt and overpainting, Caravaggio's original emerged. Today, this masterpiece is housed in the National Gallery of Ireland. In the darkness of the Garden of Gethsemane, we witness the most famous betrayal in history, Judas's kiss, the signal for the arrest of Christ, gathered in prayer with the apostles after the Last Supper. This time, Caravaggio doesn't simply recount the story. He wants us to feel it. He wants to show us what Christ feels: disorientation, resignation, the sense of being surrounded. With hands clasped and eyes lowered, Jesus does not resist. He is alone, abandoned by everyone. A soldier sees him, his armored arm just out of the canvas, reflecting a cold moon-like light. Everything in the scene feels compressed, with no way out. The composition is crowded, the space saturated. This is how Caravaggio conveys oppression and the drama of capture. On the right, a detail that changes everything. A man, hidden among the soldiers, holds up a lantern. It is Caravaggio himself, shedding light on the moment, the artist as witness and revealer, illuminating what others would prefer to live in darkness. Who knows how many times he had seen scenes like these in the violent nights of Rome. Fights, arrests, abuses of power. Men dragged away in the dark amid general indifference. 17th century Rome was a city that shone on the surface but hid deep wounds beneath its marble and gold. Poverty endured in silence, violence ignored in the name of decorum. And so, for Caravaggio, art became more and more a mission to bring the faces of forgotten Rome into the palaces of power, onto the altars of churches. The models for his St. John the Baptists are sullen adolescents, street kids, who don't hide their embarrassment as they pose in the studio of the artist. One looks away, his chest tanned and roughened by the sun of the Roman countryside. The other seems uneasy beneath the heavy red drape, forced into an awkward, almost sculptural pose, clutching a humble cross of woven reeds, set against oak woods tinted with autumn colors. In these raw, ordinary bodies, Caravaggio grafts the great art of the past. He quotes ancient statues, the Dying Gaul, the Laocoon, noble works that cultivated collectors would immediately recognize, because his message was addressed precisely to them. These were not simple provocations, but a conscious statement that in the reality of things, high and low, sublime and crude, are inseparably intertwined. It is his own life that tells a story. The unsurpassed works coexist with the man's weaknesses, and perhaps one could not exist without the other. The old wound that haunts and burns within him fuels, on one hand, the fire of his art, and on the other, drives him violently past every boundary to the point of no return. On a spring night in 1606, in the hot, heavy air of a Roman celebration, the shouting in the streets drowns out the sounds of the struggle. A game of palla corda, a kind of tennis, escalates into what seems at first a trivial fight, but it isn't. It is a duel, a settling of scores. Caravaggio faces a rival, Ranuccio Tommasoni. Jealousy, debts, insults. The reasons for their hatred remain in the shadows, whispered and suspected but never clear. What we do know is this: that night, May 28th, Ranuccio falls, struck down and dying, and Caravaggio's sword is left behind on the ground, stained with blood, abandoned in his flight.